They put my name on a chair near the restroom door at my own husband's funeral, not beside Arthur's casket. Not in the front row, where a wife of 51 years belongs. Near the hallway, where people passed by with paper cups of water, where the restroom door opened and closed with a soft wooden click, where strangers lowered their voices as if grief could be tucked out of sight. I stood there for a moment in my navy cardigan. The one Arthur always said made me look steady as Sunday morning. My hands were folded around the small black purse I had carried to church for years. Inside it was Arthur's handkerchief, pressed and folded the way he liked it, and a sealed envelope I had not yet found the courage to open. A young funeral assistant looked at the seating card in her hand, and then back at me. "Mrs. Whitcomb?" she asked softly. I nodded. She gave me a careful smile, the kind people use when they are afraid of touching pain too directly. "Your seat is right over here." I followed her eyes. There it was. Eleanor Whitcomb, printed neatly on a small cream card and placed on a chair beside the side hallway, 3 rows from the back, close enough to hear the sink running whenever someone opened the restroom door. For a second, I thought there had been a mistake. Then I looked toward the front. My son Mark was sitting in the first row. His wife Jill sat beside him with tissues folded in her lap, greeting people as they leaned down to kiss her cheek. My grandchildren were there too, lined up beside their parents, polished and still. Jill looked almost like the hostess of the day, nodding gently, accepting sympathy, touching shoulders. Mark saw me. Only for a second. Then he looked down at the program in his hands. That was when I knew. Mistakes make people hurry to fix them. Choices make people avoid your eyes. A cousin of Arthur's glanced from me to the front row, her mouth parting slightly before she looked away. 2 women from church whispered near the flowers. Someone gave me a sad little smile, as if I had chosen to sit there because I was too fragile to be closer to my own husband. I did not correct them. I did not raise my voice. I sat down slowly, smoothing my cardigan over my knees, while the restroom door opened behind me again. The service began with soft organ music and the smell of lilies, so thick it almost covered the smell of old carpet and raincoats. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I had learned over many years that a woman can hold herself together in public while something inside her is quietly coming apart. The pastor stood near Arthur's casket and spoke about faithfulness. He spoke about a man who got up early, worked hard, kept his promises, and loved his family in quiet ways. Every sentence felt like it belonged to the life Arthur and I had built together. But no one looked toward me when those words were said. They looked toward the front row, toward Mark, toward Jill, toward my grandchildren, sitting straight and solemn beside their mother. I sat near the hallway, with the sound of water pipes behind the wall. The room was full of people who had eaten at my table, celebrated birthdays in my living room, and watched Arthur kiss my cheek every Christmas Eve. But in that moment, I felt like a visitor who had arrived late and been placed wherever there was room. Mark stood when the pastor invited family to speak. He buttoned his suit jacket the way Arthur used to, though Arthur's hands had never trembled when he did it. Mark talked about responsibility. He said his father had taught him how to be a man, how to carry burdens, how to look after family. I waited for him to say my name. He did not. Then Jill stood, pressing a tissue beneath one eye. "Thank you all for supporting our family during this transition," she said. Our family. This transition. As if my husband of 51 years had been a household change. As if I was somewhere outside the center of the loss, watching it happen through glass. A woman I knew from church leaned close to Jill afterward, and I heard Jill whisper, "Eleanor gets overwhelmed, so we kept her somewhere quieter." My face warmed, but I did not move. A few minutes later, Mark spoke softly to the funeral director near the aisle. "Mom doesn't need to handle decisions today," he said. "Just come to me." My cousin Ruth slipped into the row beside me and touched my wrist. "Ellie," she whispered, Why are you sitting back here? I looked toward Arthur's casket and said, That is a good question. The grandchildren walked past me after the prayer and hugged Jill first. Someone placed an extra folded program on my lap, like I was just another guest who had missed one at the door. The longer I sat there, the clearer it became that this was not confusion. It was arrangement. And I remembered something Arthur once told me at our kitchen table. When people show you what they think you're worth, he said, don't interrupt them too soon. A week before I sat near that restroom door, I still believed my family was coming closer to me. That is the part that hurts in a quieter way. After Arthur died, the house felt too large for my body. I walked from room to room without remembering why I had entered. His coffee mug was still beside the sink. His slippers were still angled toward the recliner. The newspaper, he never finished, sat folded on the side table, open to the weather, as if he might come back and complain that the forecast was wrong again. Mark and Jill arrived the next morning with 2 paper cups of coffee and faces arranged in concern. Mom, Mark said, taking the cups from Jill and setting one in front of me, let us handle everything. I remember looking at him then and feeling grateful, not suspicious, grateful. He was my son, Arthur's boy, the child I had rocked through ear infections, driven to Little League, prayed over when he lost his first job, when he put his hand on my shoulder and said, You shouldn't have to think about funeral details. I wanted to believe I was being cared for. Jill opened her notebook at my kitchen table. She had already made calls. I think elegant but simple is best, she said. White flowers, navy programs, nothing too heavy. Navy. Arthur's colour. I nodded because I did not have the strength to discuss ribbons, hymns, or whether lilies were too expensive. Grief makes small decisions feel like mountains. So I let them choose. I had let them choose many things over the years. Once, when Mark fell behind on his mortgage, I paid 2 months quietly from my savings and told Arthur it was for dental work. Every summer, Grace and her brother stayed with me while Jill said daycare was too costly. I cooked Thanksgiving, even after arthritis made my fingers swell around the carving knife. I loaned Jill money for a business course she never finished. And when Arthur noticed Mark calling less, I always found a soft explanation. They're busy, I would say. I thought I was protecting Arthur from disappointment. Maybe I was protecting myself too. The day before the funeral, I chose Arthur's navy suit with shaking hands. I brushed lint from the sleeve and placed our old wedding photo on the dresser beside it. We looked so young in that picture. Arthur's smile was wide and my veil was crooked because my sister had pinned it wrong. That was when I found the envelope in his desk drawer. For Eleanor, when you are ready. I ran my thumb over his handwriting. Then I put the letter in my purse, thinking I would read it alone after we buried him. I thought they were helping me because they loved me. Later, I understood they were helping themselves get closer to the paperwork. The truth is, families do not usually push you aside all at once. They move you an inch at a time. At first, it was just shorter phone calls. Mark used to call on Sunday evenings, back when Grace was small, and Arthur would sit beside me pretending not to listen. Then the calls became quick check-ins from the car. Then they became texts. Then they became silence, unless he needed something. Mom, do you still have my birth certificate somewhere? Mum, what was Dad's old insurance agent's name? Mom, can you watch the kids next week? Jill's schedule is crazy. Mom, do you remember that lemon cake recipe? I always answered. That is what mothers do, or at least what I thought mothers were supposed to do. We answer, we soften, we make room. We pretend a request is the same thing as a visit because the truth would hurt too much to name. After Mark married Jill, the holidays changed first. Thanksgiving moved to her parents' house because they had more space, though Arthur and I had hosted it for 30 years. Christmas breakfast became Christmas afternoon. Then the day after Christmas. Then, we'll drop by if the kids aren't too tired. One year I brought my lemon cake anyway, the one Arthur loved, the one my mother taught me to make in a chipped yellow bowl. Jill looked at it on the counter and smiled without warmth. "Oh, Eleanor," she said. "People don't really eat that kind of thing anymore." She set it near the back, behind store-bought cookies in a plastic tray. Arthur saw my face that day. He reached for my hand under the table, and I squeezed his fingers once to tell him not to say anything. I was always telling him not to say anything. When my birthday became a group text, I told myself everyone was busy. When Mark forgot Mother's Day, but called 2 days later to ask if we could keep Grace for the weekend, I told myself young families were stretched thin. When Jill sent invitations that sounded more like instructions, I told myself she was just organized. Love changes over time, I said. But sometimes what we call change is really distance wearing a nicer dress. After Arthur got sick, things became clearer. Mark visited less, but he had many opinions about medical bills. He wanted to know what Medicare covered, what the supplemental insurance cost, whether Arthur still had that old life insurance policy from work. He asked about paperwork before he asked how his father had slept. Jill started looking around the house differently. Not like a daughter-in-law visiting, like someone measuring. "This place is a lot for 2 old people," she said one afternoon, standing in my kitchen with her arms folded. "Eventually, decisions will have to be made." Arthur was in the next room then, thin from treatment, but still sharp enough to hear tone, even when words were softened. Another time, Grace was setting the Thanksgiving table and asked, innocent as anything, "Grandma, why do you always sit in the folding chair?" No one answered. I remember Mark laughing once in the living room, pointing at Arthur's old fishing magazines, his model trains, the little wooden box where he kept matchbooks from places we had visited. "Dad keeps too much old stuff," Mark said. But it was not old stuff. It was our life, stacked carefully on shelves. And once, when Jill thought I was outside watering the mums, I heard her say into her phone, "When it's eventually Mark's place, we'll have to clear out almost everything." Eventually Mark's place. I stood there with the watering can in my hand, letting water spill onto the porch boards. That funeral did not create the disrespect. It only dressed it in black and made it public. At the reception afterward, people moved through the church hall with small plates and soft voices. There were sandwiches cut into triangles, coffee in metal urns, and a white cake Jill had ordered because she said it looked appropriate. I stood near the wall holding a paper cup I never drank from. Jill moved from table to table, accepting compliments on the service. Mark stood beside the pastor, nodding with that serious expression men use when they want to look burdened and important. I heard pieces of conversations as people passed. "She's holding up well. Poor thing. Mark has so much on his shoulders now." So much on his shoulders. I wanted to ask whose shoulders had lifted Arthur out of bed at 3 in the morning, whose hands had counted pills, who had slept in a chair beside him so he would not wake afraid, who had warmed soup he could barely swallow and pretended not to cry when he apologized for needing help. But I said nothing. Then Jill stood near the coffee table with 2 women from her volunteer board and said the sentence that changed the shape of my grief. "Eleanor won't be staying alone in that house much longer," she told them. "We're going to make practical decisions as a family." As a family, without asking me. I looked at her then, and she smiled at me across the room as if she had not just planned my life in public over a plate of funeral cake. After the reception, I drove home alone. No one offered to follow me. No one asked if I should be by myself in the house where Arthur had taken his last breath. Mark kissed my cheek in the parking lot and said, "Try to rest, Mom," while Jill stood beside him checking her phone. The house was dark when I opened the door. Not empty exactly. Arthur was everywhere. His slippers were still beside the recliner. one slightly turned in like his left foot always did. His reading glasses rested on the side table with a folded church bulletin beneath them. The blanket Grace had given him last Christmas lay across the arm of his chair. I stood in the living room, with my purse hanging from my wrist, and listened to the kitchen clock. Tick, tick, tick. It sounded louder than it ever had when Arthur was alive. I went to the kitchen because that was what I knew how to do. When a person does not know how to carry grief, she fills a kettle. She reaches for a cup. She wipes a clean counter that does not need wiping. I made tea in the blue cup Arthur used to warm for me on winter mornings. He would pour hot water in it first, let it sit, then empty it before adding the tea. Warm cup, warm hands, he used to say. I sat at the table and took the seating card from my purse. Eleanor Whitcomb, side row C. I looked at my own name until the letters blurred. That was when I cried. Not the pretty kind of crying people understand. It was quiet and tired. The kind that comes after a woman has held her face still for too many hours. Then I pulled out Arthur's sealed letter. My fingers rested on the flap, but I did not open it. Because before I could read his words, Jill's voice came back to me. Eleanor won't be staying alone in that house much longer. That sentence did something to the grief inside me. It did not take it away. It gave it a spine. I rose from the table and walked to Arthur's desk. The top drawer stuck the way it always had. Inside were bank envelopes, insurance papers, the house documents, and the estate folder Mark had asked me to bring to the reception. The first thing I opened was not the letter. It was the folder. For years, Arthur had handled most of the records. I let him because he was careful, and because marriage sometimes means trusting the person who knows where things are kept. But Arthur was gone now. And if decisions were being planned around me, then I needed to know exactly what was true. I wiped my eyes with his handkerchief, turned on the kitchen light, and whispered into the stillness, "Arthur, I think it's time." The folder was heavier than I expected, not because of the paper inside it, but because of how carefully Arthur had kept it. Every tab was labelled in his neat block handwriting. House, bank, pension, insurance, will, contact. I sat at the kitchen table with the blue teacup cooling beside me and opened the first section. There was the deed to the house. I had seen it before, years ago, when we paid off the mortgage, and Arthur took me to dinner at a little Italian place near the courthouse. But seeing my name there that night felt different. Not as decoration, not as a spouse in the background. My name was printed beside his, clear and legal, with survivorship language attached. The house did not become Mark's because Arthur died. It became fully mine. I touched the page with 2 fingers and breathed in slowly. The next section held a copy of Arthur's will. Then a small cream business card paper-clipped to the front. Helen Reeves, attorney at law. Under it, Arthur had written one sentence on a yellow sticky note. "Do not sign anything Mark brings without Helen." I sat back in the chair. The kitchen seemed to grow quieter around me. I found bank account summaries next. My name was listed as the surviving account holder. There was a pension survivor benefit letter folded into thirds, with a note from Arthur on the top. "Ellie, call them yourself. Do not let anyone speak for you." Then I found a draft form I did not recognize at first. It named Mark as an alternate financial power of attorney. Unsigned. Beside it was another note. "We discussed this once. I changed my mind." My hands began to tremble then, not from fear, but from the strange ache of being protected by a man who was no longer there to sit across from me. At the very back of the folder was a handwritten list. Things Ellie must not let them rush. Sell the house. Move. Give away my tools. Sign authority papers. Let anyone tell her. Grief makes her incapable. I pressed my hand over my mouth. What they did not know was that Arthur had seen this coming before I did. Only then did I reach for the envelope. For Eleanor, when you are ready. I opened it carefully, trying not to tear the flap. Arthur's handwriting filled 2 pages. Not shaky, not confused. Steady, like him. He wrote that he had noticed Mark speaking over me. He wrote that he had seen Jill walk through our house with measuring eyes. He wrote that he was sorry he had not said more while he was alive. But he had been tired, and he had trusted me to know the truth when the time came. Then I came to the line that made me close my eyes. Ellie, you were never a guest in our life. Do not let them seat you like one after I am gone. The funeral card lay beside the letter. Eleanor Whitcomb, side row C. I looked from one paper to the other, and the hurt in me changed again. It was still grief, but now it had Arthur's voice inside it. The next morning, I put Arthur's folder in a canvas tote bag and drove downtown before I could talk myself out of it. Helen Reeves had an office on the 2nd floor of a brick building between a pharmacy and a tax preparer. It was not fancy. There were no marble floors or dramatic shelves full of leather books. Just a small waiting room, a pot of coffee, 2 green plants near the window, and a receptionist who said my name gently instead of rushing through it. When Helen came out, she did not look over my shoulder for Mark. She looked at me. "Mrs. Whitcomb," she said, taking both my hands for just a moment. "Arthur spoke very highly of you." Those words nearly undid me. Not because they were grand, because they placed me where I belonged, in the center of my own life. I sat across from her desk and opened the tote bag. I laid out the estate folder, the deed, the unsigned power of attorney form, the funeral seating card, and finally Arthur's letter. Helen did not interrupt. She did not tell me I was emotional. She did not smile in that careful way people use when they have already decided an old woman is confused. She read Arthur's letter slowly. By the time she finished, her face had changed. "I'm very sorry," she said. I looked down at my hands. "I'm not here to punish my son. I understand. I just don't want to be managed like furniture." Helen nodded once, as if that sentence told her everything. Then she began explaining things in a calm, plain way. The house was protected. I did not need Mark to manage it. I did not need to sign anything while grieving. I could update my own will. I could change beneficiaries on accounts that belonged to me. I could replace any old permission forms. I could notify the bank that no one else was to receive information without my written approval. Each sentence felt like a small light turning on in a room I had been afraid to enter. She helped me sign the first document that morning. Not revenge, not punishment. Just a clean revocation of old financial authority and a new instruction naming a trusted cousin and Helen's office as contacts if I ever needed help. Then she wrote down 3 more steps. Call the bank. Secure Arthur's records. Change the locks. I folded that paper and placed it inside my purse beside Arthur's handkerchief. By the time Mark called that afternoon, I had already signed the first document he never expected me to understand. I saw his name light up my phone while I was sitting in the parking lot outside the locksmith's shop, holding the new house key in my palm. It looked almost exactly like the old one. Same brass color, same little teeth along the edge. But it felt different. It felt like a sentence I had finally finished. I let the call go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, he called again, then again. His first message was soft. "Mum, just checking on you. I know yesterday was hard. Call me when you can." The second one sounded a little tighter. "Mum, I really need to know if you found Dad's estate folder. There are things we need to handle." By the third message, the softness had thinned. "I'm trying to take things off your plate. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Then Jill started texting. "We'll come by around 6 to collect Arthur's suits and watches. Mark also needs the documents from the desk. Don't worry, we'll help you sort everything." I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and closed my fingers around the new key. For a moment, guilt rose in me. Old guilt, mother guilt. The kind that tells you a boundary is unkind simply because someone else dislikes it. Then I remembered the afternoon Mark had let himself into the house while Arthur was napping. No knock, no phone call, just the sound of his key in the lock and his voice calling, "It's me," as if that settled everything. Arthur had opened his eyes from the recliner and whispered, "Did he call first?" I had said no. Arthur had closed his eyes again. That memory made my hand steady. By 6:15, I was back home. The old locks were in a small cardboard box by the door. The new key was in my cardigan pocket. At 6:30, I heard it. A key sliding into the front lock. Then turning. Then stopping. There was a pause. Then another try. Harder. After that came a knock, sharp enough to make the glass tremble. "Mum," Mark called. "Open the door." I walked to the entryway and left the chain on when I opened it. Mark stood on the porch holding his old key. Jill was behind him, arms folded, her mouth already set. "Why doesn't my key work?" Mark asked. I looked at the key in his hand. "Because I changed the locks." His face tightened. "Mom, this is not like you." I heard Arthur's clock ticking behind me. I felt the house at my back. "No," I said. "It is not like the version of me you were counting on." Jill stepped closer. "We are only trying to help." But then the questions came too quickly. "Did you meet with someone? Did you sign anything? Where are the documents? Did you talk to Helen Reeves?" That was when I understood they were not afraid. I was alone. They were afraid I was advised. For a moment, Mark and Jill stood on the porch as if the house itself had insulted them. Mark still held the old key between his fingers. Jill's eyes moved past my shoulder, trying to see inside. "Mom," Mark said, lowering his voice, "take the chain off." I did not move. "Not until you both lower your voices." Jill gave a short breath through her nose. "Eleanor, this is unnecessary." "So was seating me by the restrooms," I said. That stopped them for half a second. Mark looked toward the street, embarrassed, as if the neighbors might hear that part. I thought about closing the door then. I almost did. But there are some conversations a woman should not keep carrying inside her chest. I unhooked the chain and stepped back. "You can come into the kitchen," I said. Not the living room. Arthur's chair was still there, with his blanket folded across the arm. I would not let them stand beside it and talk about him, as if his absence had made them owners. They followed me into the kitchen. Jill looked at the table, at the folder stacked neatly beside my teacup, and her face changed. Mark noticed it too. "Mum," he said, "you're being dramatic." I sat down before answering. "No, I am being careful." Jill kept her coat on. The funeral was stressful for everyone. The seating was just logistics. You're turning a hard day into something ugly. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my throat since the service. Who decided I should sit by the restrooms? Mark looked down. Jill answered too quickly. "You looked fragile. We thought the front would be too much for you. So you protected me by removing me." Her mouth tightened. "That is not fair." "No," I said softly. "It was not." Mark rubbed his forehead. "Jill handled most of that because you weren't in the right state of mind. Nobody was trying to hurt you. But somebody was willing to humiliate me." He leaned back as if I had slapped him. Then, just like that, the conversation shifted. It always did when feelings made them uncomfortable. "Mom, the house is too much for you," he said. "The bills, the maintenance, Dad's things. It's complicated. You need help." "I have help." His eyes moved to the folder. "From Helen Reeves?" Jill asked. I did not answer her directly. I opened my purse and took out Arthur's letter. The paper made a small sound as I unfolded it. My hands were steady now. That surprised me. Maybe grief trembles only until truth arrives. "Your father wrote this before he died," I said. Mark's face softened for 1 second. Then caution returned. I read only one line. Ellie, you were never a guest in our life. Do not let them seat you like one after I am gone. The kitchen went still. Even the clock seemed quieter. Mark stared at the letter. Jill's eyes flashed, but her voice stayed smooth. Arthur was sick, Eleanor. He may have written that when he was emotional. I folded the letter once, carefully. No, I said. He wrote it when he was clear enough to see what I kept excusing. Mark pushed away from the counter. What exactly are you doing? I am not signing power of attorney. I am not leaving this house because you are impatient. Your father's belongings will be handled by me. My pension is not family income. And from now on, nobody comes into this house without permission. Jill crossed her arms. You are making us sound like strangers. No, I said. I am treating you like people who forgot I was his wife. Mark's face hardened then. So you're choosing paperwork over your family? I looked at my son, and for the first time in many years, I did not soften the truth to protect him from it. No, Mark, I said. I am choosing truth over pressure. The room went quiet after that, not because they understood me, but because they understood the letter could not be argued with. They left 10 minutes later. Mark did not hug me. Jill did not say goodbye. The old key stayed on my kitchen table after Mark dropped it there, like he could not bear to hand it to me directly. When the door closed behind them, I stood still for a while. I expected to feel victorious. I did not. I felt tired. I felt sad. I felt like a mother who had finally stopped pretending the crack in the wall was only a shadow. The next morning, I went back to Helen Reeves with Arthur's letter in a folder of its own. I had slept only a few hours, but I did not feel scattered. I felt tired in the body and clear in the mind. There is a difference. Grief had not left me. It sat beside me in the car, quiet and heavy. But it was no longer driving. Helen's office smelled faintly of coffee and paper. She did not rush me. She gave me time to take off my coat, time to set my purse on the chair beside me, time to place Arthur's letter on her desk with both hands. I want this kept with my documents, I said. Helen nodded. We can do that. We went through everything one page at a time. I updated my will. I removed Mark from any future authority over my financial decisions. I named my cousin Ruth as my personal backup contact, and Helen's office as the professional one. At the bank, instructions were added, so no one could ask questions or receive information just because they had my last name. That part was harder than I expected. Not legally. Emotionally. A mother does not remove her son from paperwork without feeling the weight of the years before that signature. I remembered his little hand in mine crossing school parking lots. I remembered buying him sneakers we could barely afford. I remembered the boy before the man who stood on my porch, angry that his key no longer worked. But memory is not permission. Helen helped me list Arthur's belongings clearly. His watch would stay with me until I was ready. His tools would go to the neighbor who had helped him build the porch steps. His fishing rods would wait for Grace if she wanted them someday. Nothing would be collected in a hurry by people who called grief sorting. I changed beneficiary forms where I needed to. I signed a written boundary letter to Mark and Jill. Simple words. No accusations, no drama, just facts. They were not to enter my home without permission. They were not to pressure me about moving. They were not to request financial information from me, my bank, or my attorney. Any future discussion about the house would happen only when I chose it. The final paper I signed did not take anything from them. It returned something to me. Then I made one decision that was just for Arthur. Jill had wanted donations made to a family foundation project she liked to mention in public. It had photographs, plaques, and her name attached to committees. I chose the hospice nurse program instead. They were the ones who had helped Arthur breathe easier at 2 a.m. They were the ones who taught me how to lift him without hurting his shoulder. They were the ones who called him Mr. Whitcomb when he could no longer answer. When Mark found out later, he called me cold. Jill said I was being influenced. I let them finish. Then I said, "A locked door feels cruel only to people who thought they owned the key." A week later, Grace came to my door alone. I saw her through the front window before she knocked. She stood on the porch holding a small grocery bag against her coat, shifting her weight from one foot to the other like she was still a little girl waiting to ask permission. When I opened the door, she looked at the new lock first, then at me. "Hi, Grandma," she said. Her voice broke on the second word. I stepped back. "Come in, sweetheart." She held up the bag as if it explained her visit. "I brought bread and soup. It's from the little place near campus. I didn't know if you were eating." No one had asked me that since Arthur died. Not really. I took the bag from her and set it on the kitchen counter. Grace stayed near the doorway, twisting her fingers together. "I saw the card," she said. I turned from the cabinet where I was reaching for cups. "What card?" "At the funeral." Her eyes filled. "Your seating card. I saw where they put you." The kitchen went very still. "I wanted to move it," she whispered. "I told Mom it was wrong. She said not to make a scene." That sentence hurt, but not the way Jill's words had. Grace was not defending herself. She was telling the truth, and truth from a young person can sound almost tender when it costs them something. I pulled out Arthur's chair at the kitchen table. "Sit down," I said. "I'll make tea." She cried before the kettle boiled. Not loudly. Just a few tears she kept trying to wipe away with the sleeve of her sweater. "Grandpa used to say you were the strongest person in this house," she said. I had to look away then. After tea was poured, she did not ask about money. She did not ask about the house, the locks, the will, or what her parents were saying. She asked about Arthur. So I showed her our wedding photo. I told her how he burned pancakes on our first anniversary because he wanted to surprise me, and how we ate cereal instead, sitting on the floor of our first apartment, laughing like we had all the time in the world. Grace smiled through tears. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner," she said. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "Learning to speak up takes time," I told her. "Just don't take as long as I did." Grace did not come, asking what she would get. She came asking what she had missed. That visit did not fix everything. I am too old to pretend one cup of tea can repair what years have broken. Mark was still my son. Jill was still his wife. There were still quiet places in my heart that ached when the phone did not ring, and still moments when I wondered whether I had been too firm. But then I would look at the new key on its hook by the door, and I would remember that peace sometimes begins with a boundary nobody else approves of. I stayed in that house through the winter. Not because Mark wanted me to, not because Jill thought it looked better, not because anyone told me what a widow should do with rooms full of memory. I stayed because I needed one last season there with Arthur. I needed to hear the old furnace rattle in the hallway. I needed to watch snow gather on the porch steps he had repaired 3 different times and complained about each time. I needed to sit in his chair once in a while, not to pretend he was coming back, but to thank the life we had made there before I packed any part of it away. Spring came slowly that year. The first morning I opened the kitchen window and smelled cut grass. I knew. I was ready. Helen helped me handle everything properly. No rushed signatures, no family pressure, no private conversations where Mark could speak over me. I met with a real estate agent. Helen trusted, reviewed every page, and made decisions in daylight, with my glasses on and my own pen in my hand. In the end, I chose to rent the house for a while instead of selling it right away. That gave me time. It gave me income. Most of all, it reminded me that choice feels different when nobody is standing behind you pushing. My new apartment was smaller, but it had sunlight. 2 bedrooms, a little balcony, a park across the street. The church was 10 minutes away. the library even closer, and Grace's college bus stopped at the corner every weekday afternoon. I brought Arthur's chair. I brought our wedding photo. I brought the blue teacups, my navy cardigan, and the wooden recipe box with my mother's lemon cake card tucked inside. Mark and Jill stayed distant. Their messages came now and then, polite on the surface and stiff underneath. I answered when they were respectful. I ignored what was dressed up as concern, but smelled like control. On Arthur's birthday, I baked a small lemon cake, not for a crowd, not for people who would push it behind store-bought cookies. Just one little cake on my new kitchen table, with tea beside it and Arthur's final letter folded near our wedding photo. Grace came by with yellow flowers. We ate together without performance. No front row, no seating cards. I did not read Arthur's letter that day to shame my family. I read it because truth sometimes needs a witness. I understand that now.